when and how did you find out that something was wrong with you? And then let's have it straight out, what is wrong with you?
Well, I was standing on stage trying to sing, and I couldn't, and I kept, I do my vocal exercises before I go on the show, start the show, and they used to make me get really into a good voice, and somehow it wasn't happening. I was struggling with pitch. I didn't have any color that I could bring into my voice. I got to the point where I was basically really shouting and barking. And I said, there's something wrong with my voice, and I kept going to the doctor, and he said, well, there's nothing wrong with your larynx, the muscles are working fine. Well, it turned out I had Parkinson's disease, and of course with Parkinson's disease, there's nothing wrong with the muscle, but there's no phone lines between your brain and the muscle, so it can't get the message to work. And I didn't know that, so I just kept struggling with it, and finally I stopped singing because I thought it really wasn't fair to charge people money to see me bark. So that was the end of that.
Were you shocked?
Yeah, I just went, I'd had 2 shoulder surgeries in a row, so I thought that was why my hand was shaking. And, I've had a lot of back injuries over the years. I've fallen off every horse and fallen off my roller skates, and, I thought that was why my back hurt, but it turns out that Parkinson's can really make your back hurt.
Right.
So.
Well, what's the worst thing about the disease for you?
Well, trying to figure out, somebody said it's like Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, and it sort of is. You wake up in the morning, you just don't know what in the heck's going to happen. Like, I take a certain kind of medicine. I don't take any of the pharmaceutical drugs for it yet because I don't like them. They give bad side effects, but I'm taking a certain kind of medicine, a natural medicine, and it wears off after about 3 hours, and you just never, like right now it's wearing off, so I can't think. And you just kind of stiffen up and you start shaking a little bit. It's the hardest thing is to try to decide what time to take it and figure out what you're going to do, how to plan my day. I have to plan it with Parkinson's in mind.
You're known as a brave person, certainly a brave performer. But when you sit down for an interview such as this, a lengthy interview, is there a fear that, well, by the time we get 3/4 through the interview, if it runs long, that you may not be at or near your best?
Well, I never know what's going to happen to my brain. I used to have a really good memory, and I could just read something and I could just give it back to you verbatim. My dad had a great memory, my grandfather had a great memory. But with Parkinson's, my memory is not so good. So I'll struggle for things like a name, or I struggle for a word, and that really bothers me because I love words and I love to describe things cleanly, and I like to play with words, but sometimes they just run away and hide and I can't find them.
Well, do you sing at all now? Do you sing yourself in the shower?
I don't sing in the shower. That's how I knew I couldn't sing, because I used to always sing. I would sing in the car, and I would sing walking down the street, and I was singing in the shower. And I did a lot of internal singing, like little tiny singing that you wouldn't even be able to hear, but I would be, ooh, and I don't even do that anymore because I just don't have those colors. I don't have any colors in my paint box. You
talked a little bit about living the wild life at the height of your career. Was there a time?
I didn't live a very wild life. What's going on around me, but I wasn't, much of a participant.
Well, I want to follow up on that. Was there a time when you were swept up in drugs, partying, steamy relationships, and so forth?
I don't know about the steamy relationships. I wasn't much of a partier. What I really liked to do, and I never liked drugs, I have to say. I tried everything. Well, I didn't try everything. I tried several drugs. I didn't try injectables. I wasn't interested in psychedelics. And if I did cocaine, it just made me really nervous. It made my nose bleed. So I thought, well, why do I need this? But some people like it. I don't know why. You were traveling, correct me if I'm wrong, at one point mostly with males. I mean, this is what rock bands were. What was that like? How did you handle that? Well, I swore a lot. I started swearing a lot. I was very happy when I could finally afford to hire some woman to go with me, to help me sort of pack and unpack and put on makeup and do girl things. But I don't know. I was lucky. I had a lot of smart guys in my band. They were smart, they were readers, they were well educated, they were funny, they were nice, But men on the road are men on the road. They're men on the road. They're always on the hunt, They're always out looking for that elusive woman. But, what we mainly did was we'd go into each other's rooms and play music. Musicians are playing music all the time. A professional musician's probably going to, a guitar player's going to have his guitar in his hand probably 8 hours out of 24 every day. And that's how they get really good. And how you know a musician is they can't put that guitar down. It's not like they have to practice. It's not like they have to make themselves go pick the guitar up and practice. That's not going to be somebody who's ever going to turn out to be a professional. The professional guy is going to be the one that you can't pry that guitar out of his hand. You can't get it away from him. He's just playing it all the time. Well,
Sort of candidly put, bluntly put, how'd you keep these guys off of you, or did you?
Oh, well, that's kind of a silly question. It's a really good idea not to mess around with anybody in the band. You know, that's kind of rule number one. It's a funny thing, but there's a scene in Joseph Conrad's The Heart of Darkness. I don't know if you read that, but it's a wonderful opening where they talk about how provincial the life of sailors really is, because they're on the boat all the time, which was like the bus for us. So they only see each other. And we kind of were like that. You know, we had this little group dynamic that would start, and we just knew about our own little issues. We'd go to Chicago or Detroit or Memphis or wherever we'd go. There would be different places, but we'd stay pretty much the same, keep our own company.
I don't know if I've ever heard anybody use that metaphor before, although it strikes me as apt, that when you're traveling with a band, you know, first one place then another, it's not unlike being a sailor.
It really is. It's the same thing, you know.
That when you're on the bus, let's say,
different kind of tattoos.
that you're sailing along the highway, but then you reach a port, and it's a little like sailors coming into port.
You go looking for chicks and grog.
There weren't that many women, correct me if I'm wrong, who were performing at or near the top with some of the greatest names in rock music. What was that like?
Well, we were confused a lot. I think we had strange, we didn't know whether we were supposed to be domestic and nurturing and at home sewing and cooking and taking care of our men, you know, and minding babies, or whether we were supposed to be independent and out there running around, you know, redefining the universe. It was complicated. And to add to that, Rolling Stone, in its infinite wisdom, had declared that, you know, funk was God at some point. And everybody was chasing funk. So I dressed myself up like Moonbeam McSwine, and I got in a pen with pigs, and I had my picture taken for my album cover, because I was just trying to make fun of that, you know. I thought, if you can't get funkier, than sitting in a pig pen.
Well, for the uninitiated, and that would include me, what's the difference between funk and rock and roll?
You know, funk had a whole other concept in terms of you know, you had to have really hard rocking, you know, clearly defined rhythms, somehow kind of scratchy guitars. I don't know what it meant. You know, people that try to make those hard and fast rules aren't musicians. They really aren't. Musicians are just chasing a dream. They're chasing a story. They're trying to tell a story in some kind of way. And you make these decisions about what kinds of guitar textures you want, what kind of vocal textures you want, at incredibly fast speed, without any kind of, there's no real conscious deciding. You're not thinking, oh, today I'm going to go growly in my voice. You know, you're just singing. And for me, it was always running a tape. I was running like a film of a story in my mind, and I was just describing it in sound. So, you know, when people try to say, well, you know, you have to sound like this in order to be in this category of music, rock and roll, well, what is that? I don't know. I mean, I never thought of myself as a rock and roll singer. I thought of myself as a singer who sometimes sang rock and roll, and sometimes sang Mexican music, and sometimes sang standard songs, and sometimes sang operetta. You know, if I could get away with it, I'd try it, because I admired it.
You were viewed as being absolutely a bombshell. You were totally successful with your music, and over a wide range of music. Surely someone said to you, Linda, you should get married. You can have any man in the world.
No, I couldn't have. You know, it always looks like there's a line at the front door, but really it's not. What is it? In the beginner's mind, there are many choices. In the Zen mind, there is only one. That's an old Zen koan. You know, there's a bunch of guys that want you. I don't know if what they want.
You never thought about getting married? Never?
Well, maybe when I was 3 and wanted a wedding dress. I don't know, you know.
Well, why do you suppose that is?
I think my mother might have had something to do with that, you know. Not that I don't think my mother had an unhappy marriage. I think she had a very happy marriage. But my mom wanted to be a scientist, and World War II came along right at the point where she was starting with a kind of a low-level science job that she would have been able to work up in. And she had 3 kids to raise, 4 kids eventually, and I think that it was always a little bit of a disappointment. She used to go back to school from time to time and sort of get more, you know, learn more stuff, but I think she always sort of said to me, go out and have a life, you know, you don't just have to get married, there are alternatives to it.
But eventually, you wanted children?
I did want children, yeah. I have 2 adopted children.
And as objectively as you can, very hard to be objective about this, what kind of life did they have? As you were still on the road, you were still
I wasn't on the road
megastar?
much. I pretty much quit traveling when they were born. You know, I really wanted to be there. I didn't want to miss anything. I quit while they were little. I didn't go on the road at all. And then as they got a little bit older, I started finding out how much it cost to put them in school. I found out how much tuition in a private schools. I almost had a heart attack. And then I'd arrange to go on the road in the summer when they could go with me. And they loved it because we didn't have any TV at my house. So we get on the bus so they could watch TV.
Do your children, they're both, what, in their 20s now?
One's 19 and one's 22. But they're almost grown.
But do they have a sense what a world megastar you were at the height of your career?
I was just mom, you know. I was mom, get me another glass of milk. My daughter, for instance, until she was about 8 years old, didn't know I'd ever sung in English because I sang in Spanish the whole time that I was in all of her childhood. We were on the road with a Mexican band. And she had Mexican costumes, you know, that she would wear. And she was learning to dance and throw her skirts around. My son one time asked me, Mom, why didn't you ever sing rock and roll? So, you know, they like something else. They're interested in different kind of music.